The lights were still on in the morning in the large meeting room of the presidential palace in Tehran. It was already past midnight, but the movement inside was not over. At the head of the table, surrounded by a series of documents and digital reports in front of him, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkiyan was quietly listening to the speeches of his advisors. The air that dominated the room was heavy, concentrated, and extremely tense. This was no ordinary night. A few hours earlier, a highly classified operational plan of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had unexpectedly leaked inside Iran and arrived directly on the president's desk. The contents of the plan had not yet been made public, but the expression on the faces of everyone who entered the room showed how serious the situation was. After carefully examining the first pages of the PIMP documents, he raised his eyes. He spoke in a calm but determined tone of voice. This is not just a military threat. This is an attempt to directly attack the sovereignty of our country. We will give the necessary response. It will be our clearest response so far. This sentence echoed in the minds of those in the room. One of the senior figures of the Iranian intelligence approached Pezeshkiyan and outlined how they had obtained the document and the identity of the source. The full verification had not yet been completed, but the initial analysis showed the document to be real and extremely up-to-date. The source of the leak was still a mystery. No one clearly knew how this information reached the highest authorities of Iran. But one thing was certain. This event would take the atmosphere of crisis on the Iran-Israel line to the next level. At the same time, a different scene was taking place in Tel Aviv. Netanyahu had met with a narrow security team at the Defense Ministry deck later in the evening. The intelligence reports were laid in front of the Prime Minister. The report stated that there were strong indications that part of the operation plan was leaked inside Iran. Netanyahu angrily closed the file and fixed his eyes on those in the room. How can that be? Who leaked it? More importantly, how will the pimp use this information? No one could give a complete answer. Mossad Director David Barnea, after taking a look at the file, said, "Mr. Prime Minister, we have not yet been able to determine the source of the leak. However, it is almost certain that the Iranian side is preparing a propaganda move with this." Netanyahu thought for a moment. At that moment, two critical questions were echoing in his head, one after the other. 1. How would Iran use this information? 2. How would the international public react? Activity continued in Tel Aviv and Tehran throughout the night. While the Iranian side was holding a strategy meeting on how and when to use this document, the Israeli side was working feverishly to limit the flow of information and prevent a possible media crisis. With the first light of the morning, Pezeshkiyan held another private meeting with the foreign minister and senior security advisors. All the details of the documents were examined once again by experts. The report was very clear. The operation plan proved that Israel was preparing a mixed psychological and military operation aimed at specific targets in the Iranian border areas and some internal regions. The pimp dropped the documents in the middle of the table and took a deep breath. Then he spoke decisively. "This game will not end here anymore. Israel can no longer hide this strategy, which it has been pursuing behind the scenes until now. Now we will take action in front of the international public." From that moment on, a new phase in Iranian foreign policy was launched. On the instructions of Pezeshkiyan, the documents were prepared in such a way that they would be served to international media organizations. A special team was created for this. A presentation plan was prepared on the documents within the framework of information security and international law. Pezeshkiyan personally took a look at the contents during this process. At the same time, activity had started in Washington, Paris, and Berlin. News of the leak in Iran had spread quickly through Western intelligence networks, especially in diplomatic channels in Washington. It was eagerly awaited how Netanyahu would take a step in the face of this situation. As the hours passed, the world's press also became active. No official announcement had been made yet, but backstage news from international news agencies put the incident at the top of the agenda. CNN International and BBC World Service were using the following spot on their morning bulletins. Leaked Israeli operation plan surfaces in Tehran. Global repercussions expected. The Israeli side, on the other hand, has developed a controlled media strategy to prevent the growth of the crisis. Netanyahu's spokesman issued a brief statement to the press. The source and accuracy of the documents put forward are doubtful. The State of Israel will protect its national security under all circumstances. However, this explanation could not prevent the growth of the event. Pezeshkiyan's team was preparing a special statement for the world public opinion from the UN press office. The final version of the content would pass through the approval of the president personally. At about 14 o'clock, Pezeshkiyan made a short speech on state television. The presidential press center in Tehran was packed. The cameras were broadcasting live for the world's press. The pimp began his speech with the following sentences. Today, I am making a clear appeal to the Iranian people and the world public opinion. We will never accept these secret plans for the sovereignty of our country. The evidence we have is a clear indication of the Israeli government's efforts to create instability in our region. This time, our response will be the clearest and harshest response ever. These words caused great repercussions. The hashtags #IranLeaks and #Pezeshkiyan response were trending on social media platforms in a short time. The magnitude of the incident had also begun to be understood more clearly in Western diplomatic circles. Pezeshkiyan's team took another step in the evening hours of the same day. An urgent meeting was requested to the UN Secretariat General. The justification for this request was also supported by documents. At the same time, the Iranian Foreign Ministry sent a diplomatic briefing note to some important capitals in the European Union and Asia. In Tel Aviv, Netanyahu and his cabinet were holding crisis meetings and evaluating possible diplomatic and military risks. The tension on Netanyahu's face was increasing by the hour. Mossad Chief Barnea, after listening to Pezeshkian's statement, made the following assessment to the Prime Minister. Mr. Prime Minister, Pimp is moving in a much more controlled way this time and taking international law behind him. If he presents the documents openly at the UN, the positions of even some of our Western allies may change. Netanyahu's response was short and clear. We must not allow that. Prepare the most effective countermove ever. On the Iranian side, the opposite preparation was being made. The first part of the leaked documents was being prepared to be shared with the international media and diplomatic missions on the instructions of Pezeshkiyan. Every detail was being meticulously reviewed. That night, the world public opinion entered into a great expectation. The next day, he had infiltrated the lobbies where Pezeshkiyan would personally make a statement from the UN podium. The world's press has been waiting impatiently for this announcement. And the question on everyone's mind was, how would Iran respond with its harshest response so far? The Great Hall of the United Nations headquarters had begun to be prepared hours before sunrise. The news that echoed in the lobbies throughout the night had prompted the UN Secretary General's office to act. Preparations were being made for an extraordinary meeting at the request of Iran. The agenda item had become clear. The effects of secret plans for regional security on international law. Everyone knew that at the center of the meeting there would be documents that Pimp would disclose. During the morning, special notifications began to drop on the phones of press members accredited to the UN. The UN General Assembly will host a special session of Iranian President Pezeshkiyan today at 14:00. This announcement had been enough. International media flocked to New York. CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, Reuters, and other major agencies have sent their most experienced diplomatic correspondents to the hall. At the same time, the activity had reached the highest level at Netanyahu's headquarters in Tel Aviv. Mossad Chief David Barnea had just received information that Pezeshkiyan had provided samples of documents to several major Western media organizations through a press advisor. Netanyahu's face hung even more when he relayed the situation to the Prime Minister. The crisis was growing. They will start circulating in the world's media before we have even seen the full documents, Netanyahu said, his voice full of anger. Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, one of the most experienced figures inside, took the floor. Mr. Prime Minister, if we allow him to drag the international public opinion after him, it may damage not only the Iran-Israel line, but also our alliance relations. We need to move to a counter-media move immediately. Netanyahu shook his head. They could waste no more time. Meanwhile, in Tehran, Pezeshkiyan was holding a final preparatory meeting before going to the UN podium. In the digital files open in front of him, the order of presentation and the main titles of the documents to be announced that day had been determined. Among the most remarkable of these documents were the following. 1. A draft plan leaked from the Israeli Ministry of Defense 2 reports of secret communication traffic with some European capitals. 3. Psychological warfare plans for civilian infrastructure in the Middle East. The pimp turned to his advisors and gave his final instructions. It doesn't matter what Netanyahu and his team have to say. Our documents will talk. Every sentence should be kept on the basis of international law. We will be strong and calm. As the hours progressed, the atmosphere around the UN building intensified. The police had increased security measures, and traffic around the building had largely stopped. The UN Secretary-General's office had provided special information to the representative countries. The meeting is of extraordinary importance. It is recommended that member states be represented at the ministerial level. That was a sign in itself. The documents to be announced by the Iranian side were being taken seriously. At around 13:45, Pimp entered the UN building. He had a team of only 3 people with him: the Director of Special Staff, the Senior Legal Advisor from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the Advisor on International Relations. In the press room, the flashes of the cameras were going off one after another. At exactly 14:00, the UN General Assembly meeting began. The pimp walked to the podium with heavy steps. The hall was completely full. The foreign ministers of many countries were personally in the hall. The Israeli delegation was also there. However, Netanyahu did not attend in person, but sent an experienced diplomat instead. The pimp's voice echoed in the hall. Mr. President, dear delegates, we are not here today for an ordinary statement. This meeting has been organized for the disclosure of secret plans that threaten the peace of our region and the world. A careful silence prevailed in the hall. The pimp continued. Recently, Iranian security units have intercepted an extremely dangerous operational plan personally approved by Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu aimed at deepening regional chaos. These words increased the tension in the hall. The pimp continued his speech and showed the first document from the screen. The document was a page from the internal correspondence of the Israeli Ministry of Defense. The code name of the plan seemed obvious. The signature of the Minister of Defense and the date were present at the bottom of the document. The fact that this was leaked was a big scandal in itself. Journalists were taking notes quickly, cameras were shooting one after another. The pimp showed the second document. This time, the secret correspondence with a European capital was reflected on the screens. The Israeli side was offering commercial concessions in exchange for turning a blind eye to certain military movements. The air in the hall had become very heavy. The pimp's voice was calm but determined. Dear delegates, these documents clearly reveal what kind of danger we are facing to the stability of our region. Iran will not remain silent in the face of this threat. Pezeshkiyan introduced the third group of documents. In these documents, it was clearly stated that Israel was conducting psychological manipulation operations through non-governmental organizations in some Middle Eastern countries. At this point, the UN Presidential Court stepped in and announced that copies of the documents were being taken for official review. Whispers were rising from the diplomatic delegations in the hall. These documents were of a nature that would affect not only the Iran-Israel line, but a much broader diplomatic network. The face of the diplomat at the head of the Israeli delegation was tense. He was passing information directly to Tel Aviv via his private phone. At Netanyahu's headquarters, the meeting was still going on. Mossad Chief Barnea made the following comment while watching Pezeshkiyan's speech from the screen. "Mr. Prime Minister, this man is smarter and better prepared than we planned. He calculates every step." Netanyahu bangs his fist on the table. "Find a way to reverse this. Otherwise, the political consequences will be severe." The pimp ended his speech with the following words. "As Iran, we will submit these documents to the Independent International Review Commission. Everyone who wants peace in our region needs to see this reality." When the conversation ended, a short silence covered the hall. Then the sounds of applause were heard. This was an unusual situation. Such a reaction was rare in diplomatic sessions, but the determination displayed by the pimp and the power of the documents had changed the mood of the hall. After these developments, the world press followed the incident. Le Monde, the New York Times, and Al Jazeera have obtained samples of the documents and published their initial reviews. Initial findings. The documents appeared to be largely authentic. European Union High Representative for Foreign Relations Josep Borrell made a statement in the evening. "If these documents are true, it could create a serious break in regional security dynamics. As the European Union, we will carefully monitor the process." In Washington, a closed crisis desk had been set up at the State Department. The U.S. side, while maintaining its alliance with Israel, had realized that these documents could not be completely ignored. The public opinion in Iran, on the other hand, welcomed Pezeshkiyan's move with great support. Hundreds of people were holding celebratory demonstrations on the streets of Tehran. Social media went viral praising the pimp's determination. The hashtag #Pezeshkiyan response had risen to the first place in trending lists worldwide. In Tel Aviv, the pressure on Netanyahu was increasing steadily. The Israeli opposition was making harsh statements stating that the Prime Minister is leading the country into a diplomatic disaster. Reactions were also growing among the public. The middle class and the younger generation in particular were criticizing the government's lack of transparency on social media. Later in the evening, a new report reached Netanyahu from the Mossad. There are strong indications that Pezeshkiyan still has undisclosed documents in his possession. Netanyahu's face hung even more. The head of the Mossad turned to Barnea and formed the following sentence. "This is just the beginning. The real storm will break now." It had only been 48 hours since that historic session at the United Nations General Assembly that Pezeshkiyan's name had started to be mentioned in the world media not only as the president of Iran, but also as one of the most remarkable figures in global politics. CNN International and BBC World Service were doing special broadcasts one after the other, and newspapers such as the New York Times and Le Monde used Pimp's photo on their front pages. "The man who exposed the plan." The headline of the Times summed up the impact of the incident on the international public. In Tel Aviv, crisis meetings were going on day and night in Netanyahu's office. The source of the leak had still not been found, and the political pressure on Netanyahu was growing. The parliamentary opposition had called for an extraordinary meeting. Demonstrations were increasing on the streets, and protests organized via social media were filling major squares in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. The last report from the Israeli internal intelligence that reached the Prime Minister's office summarized the situation. 64% of the society considers the government's crisis management to be a failure. While all these developments were taking place, the preparations on the pimp side were continuing unabated. At the presidential palace in Tehran, the pimp was determining a new roadmap with his closest team. The information that he still had undisclosed documents had leaked to the outside world, and this was causing unease on the Netanyahu front. The pimp gave the following instructions to his advisors. "We will manage the diplomatic process carefully. We will disclose the documents piecemeal and together with the legal basis. Our goal is to achieve peace, but we will not hesitate to use the toughest documents we have when necessary." At this time, a remarkable move came from the European Union. The EU Foreign Relations Council, which met at an extraordinary meeting in Brussels, decided to establish an independent commission of experts to investigate the accuracy of the documents submitted by Pezeshkiyan. This was a serious diplomatic blow for Israel, because now the issue has ceased to be just a matter between Iran and Israel, it has moved to a global dimension. Diplomatic balances were also changing in Washington. Senior White House advisors had begun sending messages to the Israeli side stressing that they were carefully following developments and the importance of respect for international law. This is on the Netanyahu front. Is the support of the United States weakening? He had raised the question, and in this atmosphere the pimp was planning his third big move. He was preparing to make a formal application to the UN Security Council. The content of the application file was impressive. Not only the previously disclosed documents, but also evidence of Israel's covert activities against civil society structures in the region had been added. Pezeshkiyan made a short but effective speech in front of the international media in Tehran just before this application. The world knows the truth now. We, the Iranian people, will act together with the international community to restore peace in our region. No power can silence justice. This speech caused a great echo in the international public opinion. On social media, the hashtags #JusticeForIran and #TruthExposed soon became trending worldwide. Pimp's brave and calm attitude had also begun to attract attention among world leaders. The French president made a special statement and emphasized the importance of the parties acting in accordance with international law and the principles of peace. The German chancellor went even further and announced that she supports an impartial evaluation of the documents in question. All these developments were increasing the pressure on Netanyahu even more. At an opposition rally in Tel Aviv, tens of thousands of people chanted, "Truth is not war." He was shouting slogans. Fractious voices had also begun to rise within Netanyahu's cabinet. An unnamed minister made the following comment to the press: "This crisis is turning into a political destruction, not just military. If a transparent explanation is not made, the legitimacy of the government will be damaged." Netanyahu, on the other hand, was still taking a hard line. The latest report from the Mossad contained even more remarkable information. Pezeshkiyan also had documents of covert agreements made by Israel with some Western allies in the region. This information has caused a complete shock in Tel Aviv. Because if these documents are also disclosed, Israel could become isolated, and its diplomatic reputation could be seriously damaged. At this point, Netanyahu made one last move. He sent a direct message to Washington via a private channel. The message claimed that the documents that Iran will disclose may endanger the balance of international security. However, this initiative did not have the expected effect, because public pressure was increasing in Western capitals. After Pezeshkian's statements, calls for transparency and accountability to governments around the world had risen. And so the historic day has come at the UN Security Council. In a special session, Pezeshkiyan presented the application file, which also included new previously undisclosed documents about Israel's secret plans. Council members have officially taken the documents under review. This was the heaviest diplomatic blow of the Netanyahu government. International media announced this development from the headlines: "Iran takes Israel to UN Council with explosive evidence." The New York Times wrote that, if verified, these documents could reshape Middle East diplomacy for years to come. In the Iranian domestic public opinion, Pimp's courage and strategic moves had been a source of great pride. Thousands of people held celebrations in the streets in Tehran. A leader of truth slogans were being chanted for the pimp. And on the evening of that day, in a special statement given to a Pimp TV channel, he said the following words: "This struggle is a struggle for justice, not only for Iran, but for all peoples in the region. Those who take their power from the law will never lose it." These words became headlines around the world. BBC World wrote as follows: "Pimp emerges as a global voice of reason amid escalating tensions." In Israel, Netanyahu's situation had become even more difficult. The opposition was calling for early elections, and a vote of confidence against the government was being raised. and the latest Mossad report reached Netanyahu with the following critical sentence. Among the documents that Pezeshkiyan did not disclose, there may also be evidence of long-term secret projects of Israel. Deck. This had turned into a political and diplomatic nightmare for Netanyahu, and the world public opinion has now understood this very well. This war was to be won no longer only on the field, but in the halls of international law and in the conscience of public opinion. Pezeshkian's move was the harshest response so far. It shook not only Netanyahu, but all regional diplomatic balances. And the sign that they were still at the beginning of the road was hidden in the following sentences of the pimp. As the facts are revealed, the path to peace will also be illuminated.